These look good. Okay. We are here.
Hem.
I know. I love editing your videos because you'll always send me like 15 seconds where you go. And then you're like, okay, da 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 da. Like, so me,
Yes.
so me. Okay, so we'll do our. Welcome to my channel. No.
Please hit subscribe.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Life on Mars. This is my second episode of the podcast.
Yay.
And in case you watched the other one, thank you so much. We rearranged. This is a new setup, and I think it's really beautiful. This is my big red couch, and that's why it's called Life on Mars, because you're on my big red couch. And we have the amazing, the gender doula on my big red couch, Eli. Yeah, just thanks so much for coming. We are going to be talking a lot about hope, trans masculinity, what to do when things are down bad in a really realistic way. I think that's why I was so excited to talk to you, is because you have so much wisdom and you have so much guidance. You're very Taurus in your approach, where it's always practical and realistic and honest, even though it's very hopeful. So I'm so excited to talk to you about all of the scary things. So thank you so much. Enjoy the episode. Eli, you're here. This is the second episode of the Life on Mars podcast. My tagline, which I didn't really rep that much last episode, but I'm doing it this time, is where we talk to each other like humans again. I think I texted you that in the middle of the night or something. So will you tell us your name, your pronouns, located, all that kind of basic good stuff?
Yeah, so I'm Eli. Professionally, I am the gender doula. He, him pronouns. I'm here in Los Angeles. And what else am I supposed to go into?
Those are good.
That's great. Right, awesome. Love it.
And me and Eli met like 4 years ago?
I think it was 3 years ago.
At Trans Pride. At the LGBT Center. You were tabling.
Yep.
I was attending. You were wearing the shirt.
Yep.
Goddess Trans shirt.
Yes, Goddess Trans shirt.
And I had never heard of a gender doula before you. Funny enough, we were joking before you came on that you get asked the exact same question every single podcast you're on.
Yes.
So we can do the very abridged version for anybody. What is a gender doula? What do you do? Who are you?
So broadly speaking, I help people who are questioning or exploring or transing their gender. I also support family members or loved ones or people who have a trans person in their life and they want to learn more and do better. So I support that as well. I also teach classes and I teach workshops, and I am writing a book. So those are all the gender doula activities that I'm currently involved in.
And another interesting thing too is gender doulaing is not just for trans and non-binary people. Cis people, do you have cis clients?
I have had cis clients. Generally when cis people come to me, it's for a much shorter duration. And so we might do 1 meeting or 2 meetings. That's usually about what they need. But I have also had clients who came to me because they were questioning and they weren't sure. And then they ended up maybe not changing their gender identity, but their understanding of their gender became deeper and maybe more authentic to them, even if their identity words didn't change.
Something that I'm always talking to you about is masculinity, and specifically the issues, the very unique experiences that trans men and the unique kind of struggles that trans men deal with. What's one of the funniest and what's one of the most common questions you get asked by trans men as a gender doula?
Oh, it's such a
or
good
trans
question.
masculine people?
Yeah, so I would say the most common. That's hard to say because everybody asks the same questions.
We're all basic.
I mean, it's really hard to find good information, right? And I mean, I think that's part of it. But also, sometimes it's people will have read 500 different opinions on some topic, whether that's tea or surgery or pronouns or whatever you want to think about. And they are I just need somebody who knows, because it's you can read a Reddit comment that says one thing and then you'll read 5 comments that say a different thing and then another comment that says a different thing, and so it's sometimes you just need someone who has a perspective. And so that's been a thing that I offer to everybody, but including trans men. I would say that one really common topic that comes up is how to be around women. Honestly.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's a big thing. A lot of people come to me and they're I've always been really comfortable around women, or I've been big in women's spaces. Sometimes people will be in a very male dominant professional world. So they'll have joined things like Women in STEM or things like that. And now that they're transitioning, they're like, what do I do with myself? You know?
Yeah.
Or there's like often a lot of internalized like sort of shame around feeling like you're betraying women or even betraying a previous version of yourself by becoming this thing that you hated or that you thought was so threatening.
Yeah.
You know, and so talking through those issues and like working through those issues is a really big part of the work I do with a lot of folks.
Have you found that there's anything that trans masculine people come to you with that makes it a little easier for them to be around women?
So oftentimes, like one of the big pieces of advice that I tell people is like, hey, people probably aren't going to think you're creepy if you're not being a creep. You know, like, and it sounds so like simple and reductive, but it's actually like very true. Like, because of who I am and my interests in this world, I am very, very often in women's spaces. In fact, far more so than when I appeared to be a woman. Back then I was like, I'm one of the boys. And then like when I became one of the boys, I was like, oh, I'm one of the girls. So it's very common for me to be in women's spaces now, and I have zero trouble in those spaces. I love the folks that I meet in those spaces. We have a great time, and it's largely because I'm just not a creep.
Yeah.
You know, and I think most of us know how to do that, you know, but we get up in our head about it and we're like, oh my God, people are going to be automatically scared of me. And like, maybe if you're walking on a dark sidewalk and you're walking behind a woman, you might cross the street so that she feels a bit more comfortable. But in like an actual social space where you're like actually sharing yourself with people in any level, hopefully you'll be able to telegraph that you're not there to make anybody feel uncomfortable just by being yourself.
One funny joke that we've talked about that I love is probably out in the world, if we go out to lunch together or whatever, people see us and they think we're embodying gender in the same way. They just think we're gay. We look like we're doing the gay stuff. But then in queer and trans community, we have such a different way of presenting our masculinity, and like how we've kind of leaned into masculinity in hunting for a healthy masculinity. What do you think has been your biggest like healthy masculinity moment and takeaway over your transition?
It's so funny. My relationship to masculinity has had so many like shifts and turns, you know? So like when I was, you know, female identifying and when I was still sort of in my gender struggle era, you know, like I was sort of constantly fighting with, do I want to be this like rah-rah feminist empowered woman or do I want to be like one of the guys, you know? And I ping-ponged back and forth a lot, and I had a lot of shame and a lot of struggle. I mean, part of the reason I became a gender doula is because my gender exploration was so hard. It was like 10 years of like existential crisis after existential crisis, and it was awful.
How old were you when you came out?
So I've been, I'm actually coming up in March of 2025 will be my 10 years on T. Yes. And so, but that like, I got on T when I was like right before my 29th birthday. And I sort of found out trans people were a thing when I was like 20. Okay. So it was like
that was that
whole,
10 year.
Yeah, exactly. It was my whole 20s, which were already awful for so many reasons.
You know it. Let's have it return.
But then when I got to the part of my 20s, or the very end of my 20s, when I started T and I started my medical transition, I was like, okay, like I really need to be seen in like a very masculine way. I
love that for you. I can't imagine you like such super butchy like.
Well, I'm like, girl, I don't know that I was ever super
like, went
butch.
to Home Depot once. You're like,
yeah, I'm like, listen, I know how to use a hammer. But no, it was like, you know, I was very sort of like, I was trying to project this kind of like intense masculinity, not
intense masculinity
for me.
Yeah.
But I was also like a gender studies major at UCLA. So I was like, I'm not trying to be toxic, you know? And so part of my sort of gender exploration process was like, how do I be masculine in a way that works for me and that incorporates parts of me that maybe are seen as feminine, right? So one of the things about me is that I've always been a very like nurturing person, and I was like clocking that nurturing is not something that's typically thought of as a masculine trait. So I was like, how do I be nurturing in a way that is masculine, right? And it was that sort of like exploration that helped me create almost like a framework that I use with clients all the time, where we sort of like go through these topics and we're like, okay, so how do you take this thing that you value and love about yourself that is seen in some gendered way and like bring it with you as you transition into a more authentic embodiment?
From the personal experiences that I've seen of trans men, I think a lot of us struggle with that, being nurturing, and how do you do that in a masculine way? And I feel like the pendulum will swing so far far to the other direction where we are, the stereotype, like, how can I be of service to everybody else but myself? Have you noticed that as well?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think that there's also like a lack of self-worth, which is a combination of internalized transphobia, of course, which we all carry and we all deal with in various ways. But it's a combination of that, and also, frankly, like for most of us, the process that you go through when you're understood to be a woman in this culture, like you are taught to make yourself small and of service.
Yeah.
And me, I grew up in conservative Christian America, middle America, with a very, very conservative family. And so the gender dynamics of who serves and who is served were like a huge part of how I was indoctrinated. And like, I thank the stars that I never like really vibed with Christianity. And so it was easy for me not to it was easy for me to shrug a lot of that stuff off.
Yeah.
But there was still the self-hatred. And like that didn't go away just because I transitioned. That was a whole other process that had to be worked through. But then several years into medical transition, I had a real shift where I realized I had gotten what I needed from being seen in this like very masculine way. And it freed me to start exploring and reincorporating things that had probably always been a part of me, but that had been overemphasized when I was younger as a way of like confirming my femininity, and that I could now fold back into this and make a wholeness to my identity that wasn't there when I was too far in like the raw, I'm a man, or like when I was like, oh, I just have to be a really great girl because I don't know what's happening with my gender,
A lot of times people conflate gender and sexuality. And you are gay, you identify as gay? Or have you ever dated a woman?
No. That was part of my story. Okay, this is something though, and I know this is a slightly off topic, but
No,
I
it's
think
so
you'll
on
like it,
topic.
is that like, okay, so one thing that I think is that for us trans men who are like real gay, it's very hard
Yeah.
to figure out that you're a man.
Yeah.
Right? Because like when I was growing up, listen, my boy crazy years started very young. I was writing love poetry to boys when I was in first grade. Like real bad love poetry, okay? I was really into boys always, right? And so like when I was in my gender exploration phase, there was a time where I was like, I'm going to be a lesbian now, because I could feel that there was something, but I couldn't figure out what it was. I was like, I know that I'm queer, but in what way?
Yeah.
And so for many, many years, I was like, I'm bisexual or like something, but it's like, girl, I've never been attracted to a woman. And like, I call that the blood curse sometimes when I'm being funny, because I'm like, women are objectively incredible, like so beautiful, so wonderful, so incredible. Most of my like friends and people I vibe with, if they're not trans, they're women, And so it's like, to me, it's like kind of a cosmic joke, but it's like also I've always loved men and I've always been really into them, and that's never wavered or changed. And so I couldn't in good conscience actually call myself bisexual and certainly not a lesbian, And so for me, it was just figuring, like when it clicked and I was like, oh my God, I'm a gay man. Like, that's why I feel this way. That was a huge revelation. Took me many years to get there.
And that totally goes to exactly what I was saying. I think it's not just internalized transphobia, but it's internalized homophobia. And so much of, I think, trans masculine people and trans men, self-esteem comes from love. Like, if I could find love, and specifically if I could find the love of a woman, that fits right on into, big fake capitalist dream of what we're supposed to do, that shows that I'm like a real man. I have something to offer.
Yeah.
Do you find that it's easier for queer trans men to feel comfortable around women, or to embody their not feeling like a creep?
Yeah, I do think so, because I think there's a precedent, right? Like cis gay men also flow more freely with women, right? Like it's very common that cis gay men will be close with women. They'll have, best friends who are women, like that's sort of like an established dynamic in our culture that's seen as safe. That's why, I mean, unfortunately, things like bachelorette parties at the Abbey are because of that dynamic, right? And
Now none of us go to the Abbey anymore.
exactly. I mean, some of us never did, but
Good for you.
some of us stay home with the cats. But yeah, I think that it is easier. I think for trans men who identify as straight, or at least who prefer to date women or to have sex with women, there is sort of this second layer of sort of unlearning and relearning, or working with yourself to understand, especially because a lot of trans men who date women and have sex with women typically did identify as lesbians at some point, or like some of them spent their whole life in the lesbian community. And it's a very, in some ways, complicated thing to navigate, to be seen in public, maybe with your partner as a straight couple, when you still identify as queer because you've been a lesbian your whole life, and now like you're a man, but you also like have this whole set of experiences that don't really jive with our cultural understanding of what it means to be a man.
Yeah.
Right. And then that can also sort of have this feedback loop process of creating dysphoria in certain folks, right? Yeah. So it becomes very complicated.
Funny, do you have to give a lot of dating advice? Do you give like trans men like this is how you approach a woman? Like this is a pickup line in a sensitive
I don't give
like
lines.
not yeah in like a calm like nice way. Maybe not pickup line, but like what's your number?
So there's sort of kind of two different ways that this comes up. One, if somebody's like early days in medical transition and they're in their slut phase, I know you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, grinder.
When the tea is just the like slut juice and you're like, oh my God, yes, you know. So like that can be like the apps are a great time. You're having so much fun. You're like,
Casual.
you know, fucking everyone. It's great. You know, love that for everybody. But when people are really like looking to like meet someone and like have maybe something that's a little bit more robust, I often tell people to like either A, volunteer doing something you care about, or B, like find a group of people that do an activity that you also enjoy. Because the thing is, worst case scenario, you don't meet anyone and you still have a good time or help a cause that you care about. But the people who are also doing that thing are people that you're more likely to get along with because you already have something in common and something to talk about. Yeah. So a lot of the advice that I'm talking to people about is more of this, like, I guess, grounded, like how to meet people that you might enjoy, and then we go from there in terms of like the specifics of the connections they make, if that makes sense.
And I think that goes perfectly into love.
Yes.
This episode is sponsored by Dean Spade. Love in a fucked up world, because he sent Love in a effed up world. Second thing, because he sent this book to both of us and we just finished it, and I think it's so key. It's literally all about love and how we will get through elephant in the room. I don't like to talk about Mr. Man so much in this podcast. I want it to be a moment of hope, but also I want to be like honest. We filmed this on February 2nd, so I don't know what the fuck has happened since then when this airs. But the way that I think we both agree we will survive this is love and community, not just in romantic relationships, but in community relationships. He says in the book, we are as safe as the people that have our backs. So what do you think us trans masculine people can do to love each other?
Yeah, it's so one of the things that I've seen is that most of us are traumatized, right? Like that's just the culture we live in. Most of us are traumatized. And the thing with trauma is that it plays all these tricks on your perception. And one of those tricks is that sometimes things that are something where it's just like, oh, I just bumped into this person, feels like this person's going to kill me. And like, because of that,
So been there.
Right. Because of that, our community tends to close ranks, and kick people out and treat people as disposable.
Close ranks.
Yeah, so like let's say this is like a cancel culture thing. You know, like somebody says this person harmed me and now that person's shunned and everybody else is like. So like a different way to look at this is like, how are we going to keep ourselves safe if we are constantly kicking people out, right?
Yeah.
If I'm not safe from my community, how can I be safe in my community? You know what I mean? And so part of this, I mean, I love this book. Honestly, I'm obsessed with this book.
I'm obsessed with it. Everybody needs to read this book.
It came out at like
the perfect time.
Yeah,
it's like he planned it or something. I mean, he probably did.
I mean, but books take like 2 years
Yeah.
to publish, even if they're already written, you know, so it's actually quite, I mean, it feels like divine to me.
Definitely me too.
But in this book, one of the things I love about this book is that Dean Spade is incredibly practical and also not shaming, right? These are the two things to me that make this book so magical. The practical piece is that in this whole book, there are exercises, there are visuals, there are examples, right? And it's very easy to sort of like work with that and see yourself in it. It's not just like high-minded ideas that you have to like wrap your head around, right?
I hate that. When it gets too like grammar, rhetoric-y, I'm like, yes, I did go to college, but like, we don't need to talk like that.
Right. Like your budget of $10 words.
Yeah, it's
needs to
max
get-
out.
yeah.
I have dyslexia. I can't do this.
Exactly. And so like I love that. But the other thing I love is that it's very common in queer and trans community spaces where people will be like, this person's toxic, this person's an abuser, and people will throw around all these words. And I love in this book that he talks about like different dynamics or issues that happen between people, but without shame words, right? It's like this thing happens, right? And it happens because people's inner child is triggered, or because people have trauma, or because sometimes people feel like they're going to be smothered or they're going to be abandoned, right? So he's talking about like the mechanics of why we sometimes act in ways that are harmful to each other without applying this like shaming language. In full disclosure, like I was abused for most of my life. Like I was abused by my father. I've been abused by intimate partners. I've been abused by trans people, right? So it's like, I'm not coming at this from some like la-di-da Pollyanna perspective of like all trans people are perfect and great and nothing bad ever happens. Quite the opposite. But we are all we have. We have always been the ones who saved ourselves. Cis people haven't given us jack shit that we haven't fought our asses off for. So we've got to learn and we've got to get better at coming together. It's like absolutely the only way that we get to the next stage of whatever.
Oh my gosh, hi. Thank you so much for watching Life on Mars. This episode is going to be amazing, and we have to quick pause for the best book I've ever read, Love in an Effed Up World by Dean Spade. This book I finished in literally a day. I listened to the audiobook, which he reads, and it describes so many intricate situations that I've been in and practical tips for building and sustaining community. It's from lifelong activist and educator Dean Spade, who dares us to decide that our interpersonal actions are not separate from our politics of liberation and resistance. Love in an Effed Up World is a resounding call to action and a practical manifesto for how to combat cultural scripts and take our relationships into our own hands, preparing us for the work of changing the world. This book is so amazing, and I just want to shout out Dean Spade is suggesting for you to buy it at your local indie bookstore. If you want it shipped to you on bookshop.com. If you want the audiobook, go to libro.fm. And if you don't want to pay for it, you can get it at your local library or for free on the anarchistlibrary.org. But do not support anywhere else. Per Dean Spade and per me. Okay, thank you so much. Keep watching. This is going to be a great episode. Okay, bye! Why I wanted to start this podcast is it's really about like meeting people where they're at right now. And I feel like we have so much that we have to get through in the next 4 years. I don't even know what that's going to be. But we just need to like one day at a time it, like nimble. That's what you were saying, 2025 or the next while is the...
Yeah, so the Be Nimble thing that you're referring to. So each year I have been taking like a break during January. And during that break, I've sort of had conversations with the transcestors as part of my spiritual practice.
For anybody that doesn't know what a transcestor is.
Yeah, so transcestor is sort of a portmanteau, which means two words smashed together, trans and ancestor. And that, to me, transcestor is not just humans and it's not just people you're blood related to, right? Like the transcestors, when I talk about the transcestors as a whole, it's like every trans person who's ever been, also animals, plants, stars, like the transcestors is like a sort of like very big category, right? So in 2024, when I was talking to the transcestors in January, they told me that the theme was resourcing. And so if you go back and look at my 2024, I have a workshop, I have all this content.
Available now.
Available through my website or my link tree on social media. But resourcing was a really important piece because it was like, okay, how do we get to a point where we can weather storms and not be completely, shut down by it, right? Like that's the point of resourcing. So earlier last month, I was like, so transcestors, like, are we still resourcing? Like, what's the vibe? And they were like, nope, that's over. Like, it's still an important thing to learn, but this is not the year of resourcing. This is the year of being nimble. So they said the theme for 2025 is be nimble. And what that means is not getting too attached to any specific outcome, right? Like right now, people, it seems to me, from what I'm observing, people either want to feel like they already know the end of this story, or they want to dissociate and not think about it, right?
I've been there.
Yeah.
I think we all I'm oscillating at all times between the two, trying to sit in the middle.
Yeah, it's really hard, right? So if you're being nimble about it, you can recognize when something is happening, right? Like this is a thing that's happening. It's probably gonna have a really bad outcome, right? What can I do? That's the nimble approach, right? Like, what can I do? Maybe what I can do is check on my friend. maybe what I can do is go make some soup. You know, maybe what I can do is join with a bunch of other people who are doing a protest in downtown LA. Whatever the thing is that you can do it because you're not so frozen in your trauma response, right? And again, this is much easier to do if you are well resourced, which is why the Trans Sisters gave me that last year.
Yeah. Was it? No, it was Dean Spade. Everything I like is from Dean Spade. It was a TikTok he posted or Instagram he posted that before this, we used to get our sad information from a person. Like traumatic events were told to us by a human. Now we're doing it all alone, like seeing all this stuff all alone and then trying to go to bed.
Yeah.
Like you think you're not gonna like want to get drunk, like want to eat a million things, want to spend a bunch of money. Like this is just so hard to not numb out from or to be so anxious from. And so if somebody realistically, if somebody they didn't do it, they didn't resource last year, they're down bad. They are in the shitter, they're doom scrolling, they live in a hard place right now and they don't know what the fuck to do. What can they do to just get through the day? Like one day at a time.
Yeah. So not to just plug my course again, but it's
But
still
it's good.
relevant.
It's
you
good.
know?
It's really good, y'all.
So, and the reason why I'm bringing it up is because in that course, I literally give like practical exercises. Again, practicality, right? There's multiple exercises. There's a workbook, right? Like it gives you the tools to do this. To bring it down to like a few sentences, I would say the most important piece of this is to understand that the very, very, very small thing that you do consistently is much more impactful than anything else. Like the way that I ask people to look at this is like find something that's so simple that it would feel almost silly not to do it because it's so easy to do.
Can you give an example?
Yeah. So I usually start with something like wiggling your toes, right? So I'll say
cute.
Yeah, so I'll say wiggle your toes for 30 seconds before you brush your teeth. That's it. That's the whole exercise.
And that resourcing of getting back in our body is something that when we're doom scrolling or just traumatized by all of this, we totally forget. We totally leave our body. Or I totally forget. I totally leave my body.
Exactly. And I would say try it for like a week and see how you feel, right? And if you're like, this is stupid, then do something else. You know, like it doesn't have to
Wiggle
be
the
that
left
for
toe,
you,
not the right
right?
toe.
Pick one thing, you know, that makes you feel even 2% better. Right? Like that's another thing is like go with the small stuff, right? You might be like, I feel awful and nothing makes me feel better. Well, there might be something that makes you feel 2% better. You know, like if I'm really in a way and then I go and I like spend time cuddling my cats, that does make me feel a little better.
What if the thing that's 2% better is something that is maladaptive, like a coping mechanism that's no longer serving you, like substance use, shopping, eating, whatever it is that people are struggling with?
Yeah, so I don't think that like dissociative sort of coping strategies are necessarily a bad thing, especially in a time like this, right? You might need that, and that's fine, and it's not a problem, right? If you recognize that something you're doing to cope is harming you, try to find something, again, that makes you feel 2% better that is not that. But if you start with these really small things, but you keep them consistent, then if you get so used to doing that thing that it becomes automatic to you, you might have 2% more capacity to add in another resourcing activity, right? And that's how this works, is that it builds up over time.
The concept of resourcing so major right now, and I feel like people need to try to build more community. I think people feel really alone, they feel really isolated right now. Do you have any suggestions when people ask you, how do I find and build community off of algorithms and platforms that aren't safe for us?
And, you know, one of the things Dean Spade says is like I think he says like be promiscuous with your like social.
I loved that.
Yeah, exactly. Like this is a thing that I've also landed on, you know, like I consider myself to be in a web of relationships, and some of those relationships are with humans, some of them are with non-humans, you know, some of them involve, you know, like some text messaging sometimes, some of them are like very, very deep and intimate and close, right? So my relationships are this massive web, and all of it sustains me in different ways, you know? And I think that like when it comes to sort of building more relationship in our local communities offline, I think the best thing to do is to find something you enjoy doing and find people who enjoy doing it and then do it together. You know, I've had clients in the past who maybe lived in really rural areas and were like, I know no queer people, but then they made a club to do something, or like a meetup to do something that they enjoyed to do, you know, like some activity, like, okay, we're all going to get together and knit, or, you know, or do some sort of analog art, you know, and then all of a sudden people were coming to that, and the people who were coming to that were queer, right? And so now they're meeting the other queer people in their area, even though it's rural or, you know, a small town. right? And so just like sometimes you have to be the person that makes the thing.
What do we do when we're in community with people that we don't like, but we have to continue to build? Like, what if we, and Dean Spade talks about it a lot. What if you have an ex in the organizing group that's doing the big protests that you care about? What if, you have your best friend's ex best friend in whatever? How do we handle it?
So basically, like, there's the people in this world that you're intimate with, that you're close with, right? The people that you can talk to about your deep, desires or your fears or your flaws, right? And they can hold that with you and they can be with you. That's like, think of that as like your inner circle, right? Then there's maybe like a circle outside of that that's like people that you're pretty close to. Like, they're not your deepest, most intimate friends, but like you like them, you spend time with them, like you invest in each other's lives.
Call them to pick you up from the doctor's office.
Yeah, exactly. Then maybe another circle out is like the people that like you might be together at a party, you might be friendly with each other, you don't know each other that well, but like you like them, you have rapport, like they're fine, right? And like you can think about like circle out from that. One of the outer circles I would say would be community. And I think in this culture, we often think of community as that inner circle. Like everyone who's my community is the people that I'm the closest to. But that's not true. Your community is the trees that are in your neighborhood. Your community is, the plants in your house, it's your pets, and it's your closest people. But it's also the random neighbor who lives next door, who you've never talked to before in your life, right? And so I think that we need to like zoom out a little bit and stop being so like precious about like, this is my community. I have to, it's like this like closed fist feeling of like holding on, like everything has to be good and pure in this community, right? And it's like, no, that's not life. It never will be. It's never going to be good and pure. We're humans. We're not good or pure. We're just people, and we make mistakes and we hurt each other and we do things that are awful and we do things that are beautiful, and it's like, can you open yourself up even just like 2% more to hold that complexity so that you can, give your neighbor like a hand with the groceries once? Like, can you do that? Because I think that's the skill set that we need to be building so that we can be with each other even when things are hard, even when we feel scared, even when we feel attacked. Like we can be like, okay, I can regulate with my close circle people so that I can be here for the big circle.
So we have to be able to, I think, be uncomfortable. That's the other thing. I think that a lot of us, and I don't even think it's necessarily so much of our faults. A lot of people were inside for so many years, and those were from the age of like 18 to 22, like these really transformative years when you're supposed to like go out and get people rub up against you and you don't like it, and you learn how to be and communicate and be uncomfortable with people and deal with interpersonal things. A lot of us don't have any of those interpersonal skills. We're already traumatized, and so we go into community and we just can't handle the navigating of community in and of itself. So how can we build up those interpersonal skills without just like jumping in all the way? Maybe we're scared.
We have this like really obnoxious wellness industry that's like wellness, self-care, and we're all sick of hearing about it, and it's all capitalist bullshit, right? And so when we think of things like self-care, we think of it through that lens. But if you actually look at where this like idea of self-care originates, or at least where it originates in recent history, is Audre Lorde, who was like a queer Black woman, and when she was writing about self-care, it was from the perspective of being a queer Black woman with cancer. It's like there's something to learning how to care for yourself and resource yourself such that you can show up in community, right? Like I have known a large number of trans people who felt like they had to do everything themselves and they burned out, and most of them aren't alive anymore, right? And so like I have a real chip about this, and I realize this is a heavy topic, and also
No, let's
though,
talk about it.
yeah, I mean, it's like I've just seen this happen, and honestly, as a person who studied trans history, I've seen it happen in the archives as well. These people who like burn so bright and then they're just gone. And then people have the audacity to be like, oh, self-care, that's just capitalism. It's like, no, like Gwyneth Paltrow's capitalism, right? Like I get that. Like don't goop, but like but like like literally taking care of your body and like working with your energy, learning how to like be safe in yourself. Those are really important skills, because when something uncomfortable happens in community, you have to be able to know, do I feel like I'm going to die right now because my trauma is triggered, or am I just uncomfortable? Like what's going on for me? And like, is this person actually attacking me, or do I feel attacked? And should I trust this person, or do I just want to bond with them because that's how I stay safe?
Yeah.
Right? Like there's so many like small things in there, and it's like, no, you can't heal all that in isolation. Like a lot of these skills have to happen happen in connection. But
And
it's
you have to make
really, you
mistakes.
have to make mistakes, and it has to be okay for us to make mistakes. It has to be okay, because there were so many times in my life where I had fucked up viewpoints, and where I was really ignorant, and where I was operating from self-hate, and like all these different things. And like, I love that person. You know, he needed to be where he was so that I can be here. And we need to make that space for both our elders in this community and the youth and ourselves, right? Like, everybody needs to have space to fuck up, to make mistakes, to be ignorant, and to be able to like learn and grow and be held, and not just be like cast aside like trash. None of us are trash.
I feel when I've gotten into those cycles of like control and like canceling, it's like I have no control over anything else. But this is one thing that I can do. I can do the right thing by saying that this person's the problem and protect everybody else. And it's like they're not the problem. It's probably this entire system, and it's so overwhelming to accept the fact that we have no control, no power, honestly, like to really change these systems right now. And so, how do we sit with that discomfort is like such a hard ask. Like you said, yeah, we've both been able to share in a real way the ways that we have had differing viewpoints than we do now, things that were problematic, things that I don't currently agree with, but being able to share that with people and in community without shame is how we heal and how we learn. And being able to ask questions, right? Like I've asked a lot of questions to you that I would be so afraid to ask anybody else.
One of the things I love about the work that I do is that I can create a space where it's safe for people to ask scary questions. And sometimes that scary question is about themselves and their own identity. And sometimes that scary question is about a community dynamic, or like something that they're like, this is my viewpoint, you know, and then they will be like, oh, but like, is that wrong? You know, and it's like, we can have those conversations, and I do make that space for people. It's really hard to do that in any group that's more than like a couple folks, right? Like, people are really discounting the idea of having like 3 to 4 people that you meet with regularly and talk about hard shit with, because it's like such a small group. But it's like, no, that's actually where so much good can happen. Like I mentioned to you, I have a book club that started in 2020 when everybody was starting a book club, you know. He was like, oh my god, we have to learn how to not be racist, you know. And so like, I was in one of these book clubs, and my book club is still going. You know, like, we've been going for 5 years now because it's 5 people. And if one person can't make it, we cancel the whole thing. We meet another time,
So
you
cool.
know? And it's like, I if I had to think about why that book club has lasted so long when so many others have stopped, it's because there's only 5 of us.
Hi again, and thank you so much for watching Life on Mars. This next sponsor is very special to me because it's me. It's my art. I'll keep it short and sweet. This shirt, it just means a lot to me, and I think the message speaks for itself, but it's greatly influenced by Grand Fury and that work of the ACT UP movement, and I think it's a really important call to action for everybody right now. So watch my cute little ad, but very serious, important ad. Okay, thank you, bye. To pivot a little bit, I think something that me and you are both very obsessed with is men, trans men. I spend a lot of time at Camp Lost Boys and have had such deep and healing relationships with trans men. And I think one of the things that's most exciting to me about Camp Lost Boys, and something Rocco really works hard to do, plug Rocco and Original Plumbing Magazine also. Something that Rocco really tries to do is have intergenerational relationships between trans men. I literally danced shirtless with a trans guy in his 80s, and then at the same time, a trans guy who had just turned 18, so you can come to camp at 18, had never been around any trans guys before, took his shirt off the first time in the binder, and it's like the 3 of us. And like, it's so healing to be around trans men and see trans masculinity. And I think also in a time like this, when we are seeing just a atrocious display of every trait of toxic masculinity I think you could fathom, what do you think is so special about trans masculinity?
Yeah, you know, it's kind of interesting because a lot of times, if I even mention masculinity as a beautiful thing or a positive thing, like, the first reaction from pretty much everybody is like, you know,
Toxic masculinity feels like it's one word a lot of the time. Like, I think that a lot of the time in our community, people don't realize you could say masculinity without the toxic in the front.
right. I mean, there's a reason why toxic is a modifier, right? Like, it's only one part of the story, right? But we do live in a culture that has been completely built on various forms of violence, and masculinity as a point of supremacy is a part of that violence. balance, right? And so in order to inhabit a masculinity that is not toxic, you do have to typically do some work in this culture, because chances are you haven't seen it modeled very well unless you were profoundly lucky. And then also you haven't seen it modeled in like the media very well, most likely. I think that like one thing to start with is like first opening yourself up to the idea that there is a masculinity that is beautiful. There's a masculinity that is positive, that's warm, that's fulfilling, that's productive, not in a capitalist sense, right? But in like a social sense, right? There are gorgeous, gorgeous forms of masculinity that are available to all of us. And to me, it's been very helpful to look for my uh, versions of that, I guess, outside of human beings. And so one of the things that I talk about a lot in my work is using trees as a masculine ideal, right? And one of my favorite trees to use for this is a coastal live oak, because here in California, coastal live oaks are known as like a cornerstone species. And if you've ever seen one, they have these like big squiggly branches that just like go every which direction. And like sometimes they like grow sideways. Like they're kind of wild, right? But they take up a ton of space. And in doing so, they support at least 200 other species. And so by being big and taking up space and growing in all the different directions they're meant to, these beautiful trees are able to support everything around them and to foster biodiversity. How much space can I take up to foster a more beautiful community, to foster the life around me? And what does my masculinity look like if that's the goal? Everyone has to take care of everyone, right? And ourselves. So like that can just be a gender neutral thing. Where's your masculinity, right? And I think that where trans men have a beautiful opportunity. I didn't have a masculine wound the way that I've seen my brothers have masculine wounds, right? I grew up with an abusive father who was extremely misogynistic. Misogyny means hating women, right? And he was awful. And being raised by him was very traumatic. But I completely sidestepped being raised by him as a boy, which was a different type of trauma. Yeah. And that has given me the opportunity to access masculinity from a different perspective that's not necessarily available for men who are raised as male in this culture.
That reminds me of like, I'm sure most trans masculine people remember that moment of like going into the department store and seeing the men's clothes and that like idealization of like, oh my God, if I could just like wear that beautiful suit. Like that perspective on masculinity, I think is very rare and kind of that sidestep.
Yeah, that's right. Like instead of seeing it as something that's like gross or icky or terrible or scary, right? We can see this as a space for reclamation. And we can see like, what does a masculinity look like that fosters life, right? Like that to me is a question that trans men can answer in ways that are very specific. And in doing so, other men are invited into something that is more life-giving and life-affirming than the options they're given now. Because a huge part of the problem right now is that a lot of men don't see any option for themselves, you know? And so they go towards these options that are incredibly harmful, you know? And it's like, well, what if not that? You know, like literally.
Yeah.
It's kind of life or death.
I've had so many beautiful experiences where cis men have seen the way that I understand and view masculinity, and it has shattered so much of their deep shame and fear of their own self and their own being, and helped them really understand and unlock something new. And I think trans men coming in to collaboration and community with safe and kind cis men that want to do the work is going to be so transformative. I was lucky enough, I did have a father that was very anti-patriarchal, I would consider. I don't know that he would use those words, but what I saw was him really struggling in this world, really like being put down. He, you know, always let women speak. He never took up too much space in business meetings, and he was never very successful. He never won capitalism. We were very, very poor. He was never any of the rewards that you get for being a man that participates in patriarchy. And I think that is another thing that people don't want to say out loud, is being a man that actively denounces patriarchy and being a man that is not participating in those things is not always beneficial. And we don't have a roadmap for what it would look like to do that and succeed. It's a lot of work, and you're not obligated to do that work, but I do think it will be very transformative.
Yeah, it's like there's so much work to do. We got a long way to go, so you might as well just start wherever you're at, and do what you can do, and I see this stuff happening all the time, work being done. And honestly, like sometimes I hesitate to talk about masculinity because the last time that I spoke really openly about masculinity and the problems with the toxicity of it in this culture, I had folks contacting me and being like, great, how do we fix it? And I'm like, we all have to try to answer in whatever ways we can and be willing to be wrong. We have to do what we can and see if we can make it work. And if we fail, be like, great, lesson learned, try something else. And the more that we can do to build community and to start unlearning some of these toxic habits and to lean in, again, leaning into beauty. Like, I think that's one thing that I really want to say, because we've talked a lot about really tough topics in this conversation. And like one of the ways that I can be with these tough topics is that I try to center my life on beauty, and masculinity can be so beautiful, and like, and I mean that with my whole chest, it's like, that is such an important thing to me, because when you are just focused on this is the bad, like I mentioned, my father, a horrible person. If I spend my whole life thinking about him, I will turn into him because he's all I'm thinking about. So rather than that, thinking about the coastal live oak, thinking about sequoia trees, thinking about whatever it is that lights you up in your masculinity that feels beautiful and generative to you. To be nimble, you turn toward the thing that feeds you, and you keep your eyes there.
Eli, you're amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Where can people find all of the amazing things that you do?
So the best way to know what I'm up to is to be on my newsletter, which I know is like not always the most popular, but I swear.
We love newsletters.
Newsletters, we love them. They're consent forward. There's no algorithm. Be on my newsletter. You'll get first access to scholarships and discounts for the things that I offer. So that's my plug. And I'm also the gender doula on all the things. I'm on Instagram currently, Threads-ish, Blue Sky-ish, right?
And we love your beautiful T for T earring. We know that everybody's going to ask about that. Yes. Where did you get that?
So this is made by someone who goes by Cunty Made on Instagram. It's ZUNTY MADE, Cunty Made. And they're incredible. And you can get all kinds of things like, just anything you can think of in terms of initials.
In just like a couple sentences, what is one of the last messages or a message that you want to share to the trans community right now?
I think that one thing I would really like to say to the trans community right now is that it is really, really vital for us to find our way into hope as often as possible. Try to think of your hope as a little flame that lives in your chest, and try to do what you can to feed that flame, and try not to do the things that burn it out, like looking at social media for hours and hours. You don't actually need to know every headline. You don't actually need to see every post. You don't actually need to post all the things so that people know that you're a good person. What you need to do is keep that little flame alive. And that is part of how you will stay alive. And that's what matters the most.
Beautiful.